David Harrington was used to seeing life from the top. Born into a world of wealth, he breezed through exclusive schools, corporate boardrooms, and high society galas. But in a quiet alley behind a bustling jazz lounge, he heard a haunting voice that froze him in his tracks. A tattered coat, a guitar with chipped paint, and eyes brimming with hidden dreams belonged to Kayla, a homeless singer who possessed a talent fit for the grandest stage. Neither realized that their fateful encounter would spark a passion capable of transcending status only to unleash secrets, betrayals, and heartbreaks neither could have ever foreseen. David Harrington's footsteps echoed across the marble floors of the Harrington Tower lobby. It was nearly midnight. The security guard on night duty, Ricky Valdez, gave him a polite nod as he swept through the exit doors. This was David's personal ritual. After a grueling day of meetings and negotiations, he liked to walk the streets of downtown Chicago to clear his mind. A billionaire by inheritance and an even sharper business mind by choice, David had grown used to the halo of respect, fear, and sometimes envy that surrounded him. The city lights glimmered off reflective skyscraper windows as David navigated his way through empty sidewalks. Fragments of music drifted on the chilly night air from a street musician's corner, but he didn't stop until he heard a voice so compelling, so raw, it pulled him in like a gravitational force. His steps slowed. Then he followed the sound into a narrow alley behind the Jazz Tap, one of the city's most storied clubs. Inside that alley stood Kayla Thompson, an enigma illuminated by a single flickering street lamp. She was mid-song, eyes closed, her worn guitar trembling beneath her quicksilver fingers. Even from a distance, David could see she wore layers of old clothing, evidence she had been sleeping on the streets. Yet her voice was a treasure, filled with longing and hope. The moment he heard it, David felt something stir inside him, something beyond financial ambition and social expectation. Kayla didn't notice him at first. She was in her own world, singing about lost love and faith. But when she finished, she opened her eyes to find a handsome stranger watching with a mix of awe and quiet intensity. She blinked in embarrassment, quickly gathering her few possessions, a battered duffel bag, guitar case held together with duct tape, and prepared to leave. Street performances at this hour were hardly safe, and she didn't need more trouble. But David approached softly. "Please," he said, voice laced with genuine admiration, "don't go." She studied him, uncertainty reflecting in her dark brown eyes. In that suspended moment, two different worlds collided. Neither suspected how drastically each would change the other's fate. David extended a business card, the thick, cream-colored kind that whispered money. "I want to help you," he offered, resisting the urge to mention his last name and the prestige it carried. He just wanted her to know that he was sincere. Kayla Thompson wasn't naive. She had grown up in foster homes scattered across the country, escaping each one the moment she aged out. She had encountered strangers with ill intentions before, so she studied David's face for any sign of a joke or a trap, half expecting a sneer or pitying smirk. Instead, she found only open curiosity. "I don't need charity," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. The truth was, she'd nearly run out of money. When she could afford it, she stayed in a cheap hostel otherwise. The streets and the shelter system were her only refuge. David nodded, sensing her discomfort. "I'm not offering charity. I'm offering a chance. Your voice is stunning. Do you realize what you could do with that talent if you had the right opportunities?" She tightened her grip on the guitar strap. "That's not how it works for people like me," she responded. "There are thousands of aspiring artists in this city. I'm just another nobody living off spare change." David almost wanted to laugh, but not from amusement. He recognized that cynicism. He'd seen it in the eyes of people who had been promised hope a dozen times, only to see it snatched away. "If you don't believe me, at least believe in yourself," he said gently, slipping the card into her hand. "I'm David. If you ever need someone to connect you to the music industry, call me." He retreated, giving her space, and left the alley with her uncertain gaze following him. Kayla thought she'd never see him again, yet all night she felt the weight of that card in her pocket. She felt a spark of something, maybe a twinge of hope. Little did either of them know that night was only the beginning. The forces set in motion would soon intertwine their lives in ways neither had thought possible, and would eventually trigger events that neither could control. 2 weeks passed in a blur for Kayla. During the day, she tried busking on corners near train stations, hoping to make enough money for a single hot meal. By night, she would sometimes play outside clubs, quietly absorbing the melodies the professional musicians performed inside. But her mind kept drifting to that late-night encounter with David Harrington. She hated to admit it, but part of her longed for the possibility he offered. A real shot at a music career. It sounded impossible, something she might dream about on freezing nights beneath a battered blanket. Yet she couldn't shake the memory of his gaze, a mixture of warmth and sincerity so rare in her world. Then, on a bitterly cold Thursday evening, Kayla stared at David's card. The gold lettering read, "David Harrington, Harrington Global." The phone number was a private line. She swallowed hard. Could she really call him? For all she knew, he was some bored rich guy looking for a novelty. But the gnawing hunger, the tear in her sleeping bag, and the raw chill in her bones convinced her to take a risk. Heart hammering, she used a payphone near the bus station. The line rang twice. "David Harrington," came the crisp voice on the other end. She almost hung up, but then she whispered, "It's me, Kayla." "The singer you met?" He replied immediately, the warmth in his tone impossible to miss. "Are you safe? Where are you?" A flurry of emotions welled within her. No one had asked her about her safety in a long time. She swallowed. "I'm, near West Randolph and the bus station. Stay right there," David said. "I'll send my driver." She barely had time to protest before the line clicked off. True to his word, a sleek black sedan arrived 20 minutes later, and an older gentleman named Gregory stepped out, opening the door for her with the utmost respect. Uncertain but desperate, Kayla climbed in. That night, her entire future would change. Because David Harrington wasn't just offering a fleeting gesture of kindness, he was about to welcome her into a world she could hardly imagine. Kayla hadn't known what to expect, but it certainly wasn't to be whisked to the Harrington family's luxury penthouse on Lakeshore Drive. The doorman, Manny Perez, greeted her by name as if he'd been expecting her. The lobby itself was breathtaking, all glass chandeliers and polished floors. Kayla felt undeniably out of place in her worn jeans and tattered jacket, hair wind-blown, guitar case slung over her shoulder. Before she could talk herself into fleeing, the private elevator doors opened, revealing David. He appeared almost relieved to see her. "You must be freezing," he said, ushering her inside. "We can talk upstairs, get you some warmth and a meal." Her heart hammered in her chest as the elevator soared. She had never been this high up in a building, nor been surrounded by such quiet opulence. Upon reaching the top floor, Kayla stepped into a living space that overlooked the glittering city skyline and the wide expanse of Lake Michigan. Floor-to-ceiling windows lined the walls, and a curated art collection filled the room. She spotted a painting by Georgia O'Keeffe. She'd once seen the same piece in an art book at the library. The realization hit her. David Harrington was no ordinary benefactor. David escorted her to a plush sofa and asked Harriet, the family's longtime housekeeper, to bring hot tea and soup. "I'm sorry if this is overwhelming," he said, noticing her apprehensive stare. I wanted to offer you a place to warm up and talk." As the steam from the soup curled around her, Kayla allowed herself to relax a fraction. She told him a little about her life growing up in foster care, never staying in one place for too long, picking up the guitar at age 10. She admitted she'd been homeless for almost a year, chasing the faint dream of a music career but lacking any real opportunity. David listened intently, his elbows on his knees, leaning forward. When she finished, he told her about his own life, a father who built a massive business empire, a mother who passed away when he was young, a sister, Elena, who worked for the United Nations. Something in their mutual vulnerability bridged the chasm between their worlds. By the time Kayla finished her soup, she knew her life was about to take an unexpected turn. It felt terrifying and exhilarating. The following morning, David made arrangements for Kayla to meet Rachel Bentley, a well-connected music producer who once worked with top-tier celebrities, people like Alicia Keys, Ed Sheeran, and even had a cameo in the career launch of Sam Smith. Rachel owed David a favor after he had invested in her small production label, Skyline Studios. When Kayla arrived at Skyline Studios, she found it housed inside a refurbished warehouse adorned with street art. The interior, however, screamed high-end, top-of-the-line recording equipment, plush couches in the lounge area, and a wide panoramic window that overlooked the Chicago River. Rachel Bentley greeted Kayla with curiosity. She was a striking woman in her late 30s, known for her no-nonsense attitude. "David tells me you have a voice that could shatter glass or hearts, depending on the note," she joked, her bright red lipstick curving into a grin. Kayla's nerves spiked. She wondered if David had hyped her up too much. Would she disappoint these professionals? Rachel guided her to a small vocal booth. A few technicians stood by, adjusting microphones and sound levels. "Show me what you got," Rachel said from the control room. "Pick any song, something that highlights your voice." Kayla hesitated. She chose an old classic, Etta James's At Last. It was a risky move because the song demanded vocal power and emotional depth. But Kayla took a breath, closed her eyes, and poured her heart out. What followed was a moment of pure magic. The sound technician, Mark, glanced over at Rachel, eyes wide in astonishment. Kayla's voice was raw yet controlled, soaring through the scale with an effortless transition from smoky lower registers to crystalline high notes. By the time she reached the final line, an eerie hush hung in the studio. Rachel pressed a button that allowed her to speak into Kayla's headphones. Her voice, previously teasing, was now reverent. I think we just found our next star." Kayla stepped out of the booth, her eyes misty with relief and disbelief. In that instant, she saw a future laid out before her, a future that beckoned with a shimmering promise. But as she would soon learn, with promise comes expectation, and with expectation comes the weight of the world. Within days, Kayla found herself in a whirlwind of activity. Rachel proposed a development deal, nothing extravagant, but enough to cover initial expenses for recording a demo. She suggested Kayla move into a small studio apartment so she could focus on her music without worrying about basic needs. David quietly stepped in, ensuring the lease was paid without Kayla realizing he was subsidizing it. Meanwhile, Kayla's relationship with David grew more complicated by the day. He began inviting her to dinners at chic restaurants where the waitstaff seemed to know him personally. They'd talk about life, music, and their shared fascination with philanthropy. David donated large sums to shelters and education programs, partly inspired by Kayla's stories of hardship. One evening, after a particularly fruitful recording session, David surprised Kayla by taking her to an upscale charity gala. There, she rubbed elbows with business magnates, politicians, and even recognized Oprah Winfrey from across the room. Kayla felt out of place in the borrowed gown Rachel had procured from a stylist friend, but David's unwavering support gave her the courage to mingle. At one point, a well-known philanthropist, Marianne Scott, approached them. Marianne was the kind of person who remembered everyone's name and charitable passion. She recognized Kayla as that rising singer Rachel's been raving about. The conversation turned to Kayla's background and her time on the streets. Marianne looked genuinely moved. After the gala, David insisted on taking Kayla to his favorite late-night bistro for a quiet bite. Over a plate of shared truffle fries, Kayla couldn't ignore the flutter in her chest whenever David glanced her way. She recalled how he had introduced her as someone immensely talented and an even better person. She felt a rush of gratitude and something more. "Why are you doing this for me?" she finally asked, setting down her fork. David's gaze softened. "Because I believe in you. And I care about you." The truth was, he was falling in love. Kayla felt it too, as if a gravitational pull drew them together every time they spoke. For a fleeting moment, they let that unspoken desire hang between them like a melody on the brink of a crescendo. Kayla's new life took off at dizzying speed. Rachel Bentley, impressed by her versatility, introduced her to industry executives from labels like Universal and Atlantic. Word spread quickly among Chicago's music circles about a young singer with a once-in-a-generation voice. She began performing short sets at the Jazz Tap, the same club she had once hovered behind in an alley. This time, she stood on its famed stage, enthralling crowds with the same songs she used to sing for loose change. David watched her from the VIP section most nights, pride shining in his eyes. After performances, they'd steal moments away from curious onlookers, sharing quiet laughter in the backstage corridors. Every day, they seemed to grow closer, yet neither had formally put a name on their connection. The turning point arrived when Kayla was invited to audition for a major festival in New York, where up-and-coming artists performed on the same stage as established stars. Rachel had pulled strings to get Kayla a prime-time slot. The invitation felt surreal. Kayla, once homeless, was about to share a lineup with names like Lady Gaga and Ed Sheeran. But underlying this career leap was the emotional undercurrent between Kayla and David. One late afternoon, Kayla finished a rehearsal at Skyline Studios. David arrived, bearing takeout coffee for them both. He found Kayla alone in the main recording booth, softly strumming a tune she'd composed. As she hummed, David felt an overwhelming surge of affection. Without overthinking it, he walked in and gently took her hand. "You've given me more than I ever dreamed," Kayla murmured, looking up at him. A tear glistened in her eye. "I'm afraid I'll wake up and find this was all an illusion." David set down the coffee, leaning in until their foreheads touched. "I promise, this is real," he whispered. Then he kissed her, softly, the warmth of it dissolving any doubt she harbored. That evening, they became inseparable. Kayla moved into a modest but comfortable apartment near Skyline Studios, her name on the lease this time, and shared dinners, late-night calls, and quiet Sunday walks with David. Their love story had begun in the shadows of the street, and now it shone under the stage lights, blooming with unguarded sincerity. Neither foresaw the dark storms forming on the horizon, storms that would test the foundation of their trust and threaten to tear everything apart. Not everyone looked kindly on Kayla's meteoric rise. Social media buzzed with rumors about the mysterious woman linked to David Harrington. Some tabloids speculated she was a gold digger who'd hooked a billionaire's attention. Others hinted at a fairy tale romance. Kayla tried to ignore the gossip, focusing instead on her upcoming performance in New York. Yet even the well-intentioned praised her with backhanded compliments. "You're so lucky David found you," or "It's amazing what connections can do for someone's career." Kayla couldn't help but feel a sting in those words. She wanted to believe her talent alone carried her this far. But the whispers gnawed at her confidence, fueling a lurking fear that people saw her as nothing more than David's charity project. As the New York festival loomed, David arranged a luxurious private flight for Kayla, Rachel, and a few members of her band. A lavish gesture, yes, but also a practical one. The schedule was tight, and they needed time to rehearse in transit. Kayla, feeling uneasy with such extravagance, tried to protest, but David brushed her concerns aside. "Your voice needs rest, not the chaos of a commercial flight," he insisted. Arriving in Manhattan, Kayla found herself in a high-end hotel suite with sweeping views of Central Park. Gleaming skyscrapers caught the early morning sun as the group geared up for the festival soundcheck. The day felt like a dream, yet Kayla's nerves were frayed. She paced backstage, guitar in hand, replaying her setlist in her mind. When she finally stepped out to perform, thousands of fans cheered her name, some already familiar with her viral clips floating around social media. Under the spotlight, Kayla felt both exhilarated and terrified. But as soon as she began to sing, everything faded away. Music was her safe place, her home. She hit every note with crystalline precision, each lyric loaded with the raw emotion of her journey. The crowd exploded in applause. Cameras flashed. Industry executives made mental notes. Kayla Thompson, the homeless singer turned rising star, was the talk of the festival. David stood by the stage, tears in his eyes, an expression of pure adoration. What she didn't notice, lost in her triumphant glow, was the camera crew quietly filming every moment, capturing details that could be twisted into a tabloid sensation. Fame had finally arrived, and with it came the first ripples of betrayal that would soon strike her heart. By the time Kayla returned to Chicago, she was a hot topic on entertainment news channels. Interview requests poured in. Rachel negotiated deals for a debut album, endorsements, and even cameo appearances on primetime TV. Kayla found herself on set for a quick interview with The Tonight Show, sharing the stage with established celebrities. Overnight, she had gone from sleeping in shelters to mingling with talk show hosts and wearing designer dresses. It should have felt like a dream come true. Instead, Kayla felt strangely out of alignment with her own life. The pace left her breathless, the camera flashes disorienting, the gossip rags relentless. David, ever supportive, tried to buffer her from the media frenzy. When Kayla finally had a day off, he took her to a secluded cabin on Lake Geneva, a place where cell signals were weak and paparazzi rarely ventured. For the first time in months, Kayla relaxed. They cooked a simple meal together, joked about their earliest memories, and even strolled hand in hand along the lake shore at sunset. That night, as they cuddled by the fireplace, Kayla confessed her biggest fear. "I'm afraid that this world of fame, of all this hype, will swallow me whole. I don't want to become someone I'm not, David." He kissed her forehead, pulling her closer. "You are stronger than you realize. No matter what happens, you'll always have me by your side." Those words felt like a vow, but life had a cruel sense of timing. The very next morning, while Kayla sipped coffee by the lake, David's phone buzzed with urgent messages. She watched his expression shift from calm to agitated. "What's wrong?" she asked quietly. He hesitated. "Tabloids. They're running a story about you. Some anonymous source claims you faked your homeless background for publicity." Kayla's eyes widened, heart pounding. "That's ridiculous. Why would anyone?" "There's more," David said, voice tight. "They're insinuating that you're using me for money and connections. They say you and Rachel orchestrated this sob story so you could shoot to stardom." Anger flashed in Kayla's chest, but beneath it smoldered a flicker of betrayal. Someone was feeding lies to the press, and it had to be someone inside her circle. Suspicion began to fester, and with it, her world started to unravel at the seams. Kayla returned to the city with dread coiling in her stomach. Social media was ablaze with hateful comments, trolls accusing her of deceit. Even some well-wishers seemed confused by the swirling rumors, unsure what to believe. The trust Kayla once felt from her budding fan base suddenly felt shaky. Rachel tried to do damage control, booking Kayla on a reputable morning talk show to address the allegations. The host, Sharon Blake, was known for her empathetic but straightforward interviewing style. When the cameras rolled, Kayla recounted her life story, tears welling in her eyes as she described living in foster homes, drifting between shelters, and singing on street corners. Despite her heartfelt words, the online chatter only intensified. Headlines blared, "Rags or Riches? The Kayla Thompson Conspiracy." David summoned his best PR consultants to handle the crisis, but the suspicion refused to die. Meanwhile, cracks appeared in Kayla's inner circle. Session musicians who once praised her suddenly distanced themselves. Minor acquaintances from her early days emerged, claiming they had proof she had never been homeless. Even some foster care records mysteriously went missing, fueling the conspiracy theories. The question on everyone's lips became, who would benefit from destroying Kayla's credibility? Amid the chaos, Kayla's relationship with David took a hit. He was busy with Harrington Global's own problems. A major deal with an international firm was in jeopardy, and investors were skittish over the negative press swirling around him and his scandalous girlfriend. Late nights at the office became the norm, leaving Kayla feeling isolated. One evening, Kayla sat alone in her apartment, scanning through hateful articles, when her phone rang. The caller ID read, "Private number." She hesitated, then answered. A raspy voice came through. "If you value your career, you'll break it off with Harrington. The bigger you get, the harder you'll fall." Before Kayla could respond, the line went dead. A cold dread gripped her. She realized that someone powerful was orchestrating this storm of rumors and threats. Someone who wanted to dismantle her life piece by piece, and she had no idea why or how to stop them. The next day, Kayla met with Rachel Bentley in a tense emergency meeting at Skyline Studios. They combed through every contact, every potential foe, but no obvious suspect jumped out. Rachel suggested they hire a private investigator to trace the source of the defamatory rumors. Kayla agreed, though she wondered if she was descending into paranoia. Her music career was now overshadowed by scandal. Record label reps postponed meetings, citing unresolved public perception issues. For Kayla, who had once only yearned for a warm meal and a chance to sing, it felt surreal that her dream was being undone by faceless whispers. Meanwhile, David wrestled with his own predicament. Harrington Global's stock was dipping, not disastrously, but enough for board members to question the negative publicity. Some of his advisors strongly urged him to publicly separate himself from Kayla. Disheartened, he refused, standing by her at the cost of internal friction within the company. Their once blissful romance began to strain under the weight of endless suspicion and media scrutiny. Kayla found herself questioning everyone around her, sometimes even David. Late one night, she confronted him about the tension. "Do you ever regret helping me?" she asked, voice trembling with vulnerability. "Do you think I've become a liability for you?" David's eyes flashed with hurt. "Don't say that. This is just a rough patch. I'll fix it. I'll protect you." But deep down, neither could deny the mounting pressure. The tabloids started linking David to past relationships, claiming old flames were coming forward with stories about his womanizing. Kayla, who had never worried about such rumors, began to doubt her own place in his life. In the midst of this turmoil, the private investigator delivered a cryptic message. "I've found something. Need to meet in person." Kayla and Rachel hurried to the investigator's office. The man, a former police detective named Lionel Garcia, laid out his findings: phone records, questionable bank transfers, and suspicious communications from a blocked email address. Kayla's stomach dropped when she recognized a name among the contacts: Jeremy Fields, one of Rachel's old acquaintances, and a minor producer who'd once been close to them. Pieces clicked into place. But the puzzle was only half complete, and the next discovery would shatter Kayla's fragile trust entirely. Jeremy Fields had been around during Kayla's initial sessions at Skyline Studios. He was a freelance music engineer, charming on the surface, always quick with a compliment. Kayla remembered him praising her voice, offering to help with arrangements. He seemed eager to be part of her ascent. Now, Lionel Garcia's records showed that Jeremy had been in contact with multiple tabloids, trading insider information for cash deposits. The revelations made Kayla's skin crawl. Rachel clutched the printed logs with trembling hands. "He must be the one leaking your story," she said, her voice laced with anger. Kayla felt immediate relief that there was a concrete suspect, but the investigator's expression remained grim. He explained that Jeremy's transmissions hinted at a larger scheme. "He's part of it, but someone is funding him. Big money. We're talking not just a few $1,000s. These are six-figure sums going into his account, which begs the question who's bankrolling him and why target you. That why haunted Kayla. She had no major enemies. She'd barely existed on anyone's radar before David discovered her. Which led to a chilling thought: was someone targeting David through her? Harrington Global had rivals business moguls who might want to undermine David's credibility. Kayla felt a surge of guilt, wondering if her involvement was a vulnerability exploited by David's competitors. Unwilling to let the matter fester, Kayla marched out of Garcia's office with Rachel in tow. They headed straight to Jeremy's last known address, a cramped apartment in a rundown complex. He wasn't home, and neighbors claimed they hadn't seen him in days. The place was suspiciously vacant, as if abandoned in haste. A single piece of mail was stuck in the door's frame, indicating Jeremy hadn't returned for at least a week. Shaken and exhausted, Kayla returned to David's penthouse. She found him buried in documents, eyes bloodshot from stress. Without preamble, she explained everything. David's expression darkened with rage. "Jeremy Fields," he repeated, nearly spitting out the name. "He approached me once, offering a shady investment tip. I turned him down." They stared at each other, understanding that the betrayal ran deep. The stage was set for a confrontation, but neither realized how deadly the game had become, or that the next blow would come from a source far closer than Jeremy. Harrington Global's troubles escalated. An important partnership deal with the Japanese conglomerate Kiyoshi Industries stalled after a string of negative articles linked David's personal controversies to questionable company ethics. David struggled to keep his board appeased. Despite the swirl of rumors, he refused to abandon Kayla, insisting to everyone that she was the victim of a vicious smear campaign. Kayla's own life took a harrowing turn when a brick was thrown through the window of her apartment. Shattered glass littered the floor, and the graffiti message on the wall scrawled in red paint read, "Fake." Terrified, Kayla spent the night at David's place, traumatized by the direct threat. The next morning, she tried to find solace in music, returning to Skyline Studios to record a new track. But her voice quivered with emotional strain. Rachel gave her a comforting hug. "We'll get through this," she assured her. Then, out of nowhere, Jeremy Fields appeared in the studio lobby, wearing a defiant smirk. Kayla's heart pounded as she stepped forward. "Why are you doing this?" she demanded. "I never did anything to you." Jeremy shrugged. "It's not personal. You're just a means to an end. Some big players have an interest in seeing Harrington fall, and I found a way to cash in." Before Kayla could respond, Rachel darted forward, eyes blazing. "You coward!" she spat, raising a hand to slap him. Jeremy easily caught her wrist, twisting it painfully. Kayla lunged to intervene, only for Jeremy to shove her away. Security guards finally rushed over, restraining Jeremy. But he wore a smug grin. "You think this ends with me?" he sneered. "You have no idea how high up this goes." The police were called, and Jeremy was escorted away. But the encounter left Kayla shaken. She collapsed into a chair, tears burning her cheeks. Rachel tried to console her, but Kayla felt something was off. Jeremy seemed oddly confident, as though someone with far greater power was protecting him. That night, Kayla confided her fears to David. "He's just a pawn, David. There's someone else pulling the strings, and I'm terrified of what comes next." David held her close, his own voice filled with dread. "We'll face it together," he promised, not yet realizing that the next betrayal would come from a place neither of them could have imagined. Days turned into a tense, waiting game. David's financial experts scrambled to identify any leaks or manipulations undermining Harrington Global. Kayla's private investigator, Lionel, dug deeper into Jeremy's connections, and then a bombshell dropped, a reliable tip pointing to David's own sister, Elena Harrington. Elena was a diplomat working with the United Nations, far removed from corporate affairs, or so Kayla thought. But Lionel provided evidence of encrypted emails between Elena and Jeremy, referencing strategic sabotage. At first, Kayla refused to believe it. Elena had always been kind, philanthropic, the polar opposite of someone who would orchestrate a vicious smear campaign. Conflicted but determined to uncover the truth, Kayla confronted Elena in person. She found her in a sleek downtown hotel suite, fresh off a plane from Geneva. Elena's cool demeanor and practiced diplomatic smile did nothing to calm Kayla's racing heart. "Tell me it isn't true," Kayla pleaded, showing her the incriminating emails. Elena's expression hardened. "Fine, I won't deny it. I have been working with Jeremy, feeding the tabloids, stirring controversy." Kayla's breath caught in her throat, tears threatening to spill. "Why? How could you do this to your own brother?" Elena's face twisted with bitter resolve. "Because David is destroying the family legacy. After our father's death, I tried to steer Harrington Global toward humanitarian goals. But David took it in a different direction, risky tech ventures, high-stakes investments. The board ignored me. He ignored me. I knew I couldn't directly challenge him, so I found another way. But that doesn't explain why you targeted me," Kayla shot back. Elena arched an eyebrow, her voice dripping with contempt. "You're his weak spot. You strolled into his life with nothing, and suddenly you have everything. Fame, fortune, my brother's heart. I had to turn the public against you, thereby destabilizing David's position. It was never personal. You were just strategic collateral." Kayla felt a wave of nausea. Elena's coldness was more terrifying than Jeremy's belligerence. "David loves you," she managed to say. "He's proud of your humanitarian work." Elena let out a hollow laugh. "Spare me the sentiment. This is about legacy and power. If David sees the light, we can fix this. If not, Harrington Global collapses under scandal, and I'll rebuild it into something worthwhile." Kayla's heart hammered as she left the suite, clutching the damning evidence. She had no idea how to break this to David, or how to protect him from the ultimate betrayal, his own flesh and blood. Kayla didn't hesitate. She rushed straight to Harrington Tower, determined to tell David everything. She found him in his office, surrounded by anxious executives. As soon as Kayla locked eyes with him, David dismissed the board members and closed the door. She handed him Lionel's report, her hands shaking. "It's Helena," she whispered, tears stinging her eyes. "She's behind all this." David skimmed the documents, his face morphing from confusion to disbelief to heartbroken realization. For several agonizing moments, he stared out the window, the weight of betrayal sinking in. Finally, he spoke, voice thick with emotion. "How did we reach this point?" Kayla gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "She believes she's saving the company from you," she said, recalling Elena's bitter words. "And apparently, I was just a way to undermine your credibility." David's fists clenched. He loved his sister deeply, but the pain of her duplicity cut deeper than any corporate rivalry. That evening, he arranged a private meeting with Elena. Kayla offered to come, but he insisted he do it alone. Elena arrived at the penthouse with the same cool composure Kayla had seen at the hotel. David confronted her with the evidence. She admitted everything, echoing the same justifications Kayla had heard: corporate direction, family legacy, disapproval of David's impulsive decisions, his charitable focus on marginalized communities, his involvement with a homeless singer turned sensation. "How can you justify the harm you've done?" David demanded, his voice trembling with anger and sorrow. "You nearly destroyed Kayla's career, and you put our company at risk. You're my sister." Elena's gaze flickered. For a fleeting moment, sadness touched her features. "I believed the end would justify the means. Father wanted us to be visionaries, not reckless. You took a path I couldn't support." She paused. "You'll never see reason if you're blinded by love." David's jaw tightened. "We can't come back from this, Elena. You've gone too far." He strode to the door, signaling the meeting was over. "You should leave, and don't contact Kayla again." As Elena walked away, she cast a final glance over her shoulder. "Remember, David," she said softly, "everything I did in the name of Harrington." David closed the door, the echo reverberating through the empty hall. Neither sibling knew if their relationship could ever be mended. Kayla stood in the shadows, tears on her cheeks, wishing desperately that love could have healed the wounds of ambition. In the aftermath of Elena's confession, the carefully placed dominoes began to topple. Jeremy Fields, now facing legal action, turned witness, providing additional proof of Elena's role in orchestrating the smear campaign. With evidence stacked against her, Elena had little choice but to quietly resign from her UN position to avoid a full-blown scandal. David, grief-stricken by his sister's betrayal, threw himself into damage control. Lawyers, public relations experts, and crisis managers worked around the clock to clear Kayla's name and stabilize Harrington Global. A public statement was issued, condemning Elena's actions and dispelling the false rumors about Kayla's background. The apology and clarifications gained traction. Former skeptics began to realize the extent of the sabotage. Kayla received heartfelt messages from fans who regretted believing the lies. Support poured in from corners she never expected: club owners who once hosted her, social workers from her foster care days, and even Marianne Scott, the philanthropist who offered to set up a charity concert for homeless youth in Kayla's name. Nevertheless, Kayla remained shaken. Though her name was cleared, the emotional scars lingered. Fame now felt like a fragile bubble that could burst at any moment. The only constant in her life, ironically, was David, the same person who had taken her hand in that alley and believed in her voice. One starry evening, weeks after Elena's exposure, David escorted Kayla to the same rooftop lounge where they'd shared one of their earliest dinners. The city lights sparkled, reflecting off the dark waters of Lake Michigan in the distance. As a gentle wind ruffled Kayla's hair, David turned to her with an unspoken resolution in his eyes. "I've lost faith in so many things recently," he said, voice quivering, "but I haven't lost faith in us." Kayla's heart pounded as David got down on one knee, producing a small velvet box from his jacket pocket. Inside lay a simple yet elegant ring. "I love you, Kayla Thompson. Not for your fame or your talent, but for your heart. Will you marry me?" Tears welled in Kayla's eyes as she recalled every hardship, every betrayal, every moment they stood by each other. With a trembling smile, she whispered, yes, their future remained uncertain, the scars of betrayal still fresh. But in that singular moment, set against the backdrop of a city that had once seemed so cold and unfeeling, their love shone brighter than the lights below. Thank you for joining me on this emotional roller coaster, where a chance encounter between a billionaire and a homeless singer ignited a love powerful enough to defy conspiracy, betrayal, and heartbreak. In the end, Their resilience proved that genuine affection endures beyond the shadows of doubt, and that the worst betrayals often come from those we least suspect. If you found yourself inspired by Kayla's unbreakable spirit or touched by David's unwavering loyalty, help this story reach more hearts by leaving a like, sharing it with friends, and subscribing to my channel. Your support allows me to continue telling stories that celebrate courage, hope, and the possibility of redemption, no matter how dark the path. So hit that notification bell, stay tuned, and let's keep exploring the uncharted territories where love and ambition collide. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next story.